Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in again. I've got Republic Broadcasting's popular radio host and the founder of WhatReallyHappened.com, Mike Rivero. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you so much. I know how busy you are. It's amazing that you can make time for us. We really appreciate it. There's so much going on in the world, Mike. Revolution in Spain, where the police are beating down protesters, just like they did recently in Anaheim, California, and during the Occupy movement. It just seems like the police-state apparatus is just going to beat down the people no matter how hard humanity rises. Do you want to comment a little bit about what we see going on in Spain?
Well, basically it comes down to the predations of our current banking system, which when you have a privately owned bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, by design, debt grows faster than the available money supply. And as a result, sooner or later, all the nations that are enslaved to a private central bank, they get into these kind of debt crises. And inevitably, the banker's attitude is, well, you know, you owe us this money, and you have to basically pay it back with harder work, even if you don't have a job, or we'll take your homes or your gold or whatever. And it's reached a crisis point because people are willing to endure the predations of private banks when there's a healthy economy and there's enough for everybody to go around. But because private central banks are invariably pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes, you reach a point where it's all going to start collapsing, where they can't find the new borrowers to allow the creation of new money to help pay the interest on the old money. And you get into a crisis situation like Greece, where so much money is owed and the bankers are saying you've got to pay it, and the governments, which are supported by the bankers during their campaigns, are basically sending a message to their people. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. And sooner or later, the people stand up and say, we don't have any more to give you. We're tired of this. And that's when you're on the road to revolution and violence. We saw it happen in pre-revolutionary France. We saw it happen in the United States of America. Most schools teach that the American Revolution was all about the Tea Party and the Stamp Act. And they hardly ever mention the Currency Act, which was when King George III issued an order that all American commerce had to use banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. And if you go back and you look at the writings of Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, it is very clear that it was the effects of the Currency Act that fueled the anger that led to the American Revolution. But since we had a corrupt Congress and a corrupt president sell us back into that same banking system in 1913, the public schools stopped teaching about the Currency Act, and most Americans, even today, they're not even aware there was a different kind of banking system that made this country powerful. And we see the same message from the schools and the corporate media that this is the only way banking can run. There is no other alternative system, but we know that that's a lie.
Yeah, we sure do. And you know, thanks largely to the Internet, people around the entire planet are waking up. I posted a piece at SGT Report. It was a Joe Rogan interview with former CNN reporter turned whistleblower Amber Lyon, who basically was let go from CNN after she balked about the fact that CNN International refused to play her report about torture and murder and revolution in Bahrain. But at the same time, they were more than pleased to play propaganda programming paid for by the government of Bahrain. You know, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that it seems to me the genie's out of the bottle thanks to the Internet. The world's waking up to this corruption.
Well, you're absolutely correct about that. When the nation was founded, the right to freedom of expression was granted to the media, but with that was a responsibility to serve as a watchdog on government abuse. The American corporate media has abandoned that role, and so the Internet and the alternative media have basically stepped in to perform that service for the public.
And with all credit to WhatReallyHappened.com, you've been really a pioneer in that avenue of truth-telling for, better than a decade now, right?
We're almost on 20 years now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. And so thanks for all you do. I think the next thing I want to talk to you about, I want to get your opinion about what I'm calling the madness of the ruling elite, because this nonstop warmongering over going to war with Iran is really got the potential to take us to World War III, Michael. I know you feel strongly about that. Hillary Clinton was just on Conversations on Diplomacy with Charlie Rose and James Baker, the former Secretary of State under George H.W. Bush, and this is all over the Internet now because she's boisterously laughing about this idea of a potential false flag and waging war against Iran, because in this clip, James Baker is saying, look, if we can't get Iran to play ball, then we need to, quote, take them out.
Mm-hmm.
It's just disgusting.
Well, it is disgusting, and it's all the more disgusting because behind all the rhetoric about weapons of mass destruction and threat to Israel and all the rest of the other propaganda used to sell the war, the reality is this is all about money, and this nightmare goes all the way back to 1945 and the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, coming out of World War II, the United States dollar was considered a very strong, safe, dependable currency. And so at Bretton Woods, all of the various nations of the West mostly basically agreed that the dollar would be the international reserve currency and the international trade currency. And this agreement, of course, gave the United States a distinct financial advantage because before anybody could engage in international trade, they had to go to the United States of America and buy dollars, usually for gold bullion. And this agreement was made on the condition that the U.S. government would not overprint the dollar, and also because the dollar was always convertible to gold at the rate of $35 per ounce of gold. Well, things kind of went along, and of course the U.S. government broke their promise not to overprint the dollar, and finally in the 1970s, some of these foreign nations started to get very, very nervous because these piles of paper notes were piling up and they weren't sure what they were worth. So France notified the United States government that they wanted to trade some of their paper dollar surplus for gold at $35 per ounce, and Richard Nixon basically slammed the gold window shut, ended the convertibility. He said it was temporary, but of course it turned into permanent, and he went on TV and said, we're doing this to protect the U.S. economy and it's our best strategic interest. But at that point, the rest of the world got very scared about relying on the dollar for trade and reserve status because clearly the United States was inflating its value away and it was no longer good as gold. So in order to prevent countries from abandoning the dollar, the United States government engaged in what I might say was sort of a little protection racket. They had already armed Israel, which was proving belligerent to its neighbors. So the U.S. government went to all of the oil-producing nations on Earth. They went to all the OPEC nations, and they said, we'll make you a deal. As long as you only sell your oil for U.S. dollars, we guarantee your safety and security in the military sense. And all the oil-producing nations went along with that deal. And as a result, other nations still had to go to the United States of America and buy dollars before they could buy oil. And that's why the gold dollar gave away to what they call the petrodollar. So the problem is more and more oil-producing nations are walking away from that agreement. Iraq was selling their oil for the euro, so of course the U.S. invades, puts in a puppet government, and Iraq's oil is now available for sale only for U.S. dollars. Gaddafi was talking about selling his oil for other than the U.S. dollar, plus he was also instituting a state bank and a gold-based dinar, so we invade Iraq and kill Gaddafi. We put a new puppet government into Libya, which said Libya's oil is only for sale for dollars, although that government is now in the process of falling apart. Iran sells their oil for other than the U.S. dollar. Venezuela is selling more of their oil for the yuan than the dollar, which is why they were trying as hard as they could to get Hugo Chavez out of there. And basically all of these wars, if you look very carefully, every one of these wars or every one of these regime changes, covert or otherwise, are targeted on the oil-producing nations to force them to go back to dealing only in dollars. Because without nations having to come buy dollars in order to buy oil, foreign demand for the dollar is going to evaporate. There's nothing else propping it up. It's not backed by gold. There aren't enough American taxpayers alive to make good on the Treasury bonds. We've thrown away most of our manufacturing and agriculture. They certainly don't want to import our GMO corn right now. So this whole campaign of militarism is all about recapturing control of the oil-producing nations and shackling them to the dollar to prop up this Ponzi scheme for at least another administration.
Right, and we know that the death of the petrodollar is nearly upon us. We can see it. We see the signs all around us as other nations balk against this U.S. imperialism. But, if we take a look at Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard, things have really changed in recent years, Michael. Take a look at Russia, take a look at China. This isn't like us marching into Panama, this is Iran. This could incite World War III. It's a very dangerous situation, and the madness of this ruling elite, they don't seem to care. Take a look at Patrick Clausen, who was recently talking about, creating a false flag in order to get the United States into war with Iran. They just don't care. It's like they have no common sense left.
Well, they're seeing this solely in terms of propping up the dollar in the American system, and they understand that if the dollar is dropped as the world's reserve currency, it's all over. And these guys don't care because they've got underground bunkers. The U.S. has been engaged in a program of massive construction of underground bunkers for the ruling elite, for Wall Street, for the Congress, for the president. You all paid for them, but of course you're not going to be allowed in when things start to go wrong. And they are courting a nuclear war. And you need to remember that for all this talk about the threat from a nuclear Iraq or a threat from a nuclear Iran, there's only one nation that's ever actually used nuclear weapons against the civilians of another country, and that's the United States. So it's a very dangerous game of brinksmanship. The U.S. is sort of implying they're willing to go to nuclear war in the hope that Russia and China might back down. But Russia and China understand that if Bretton Woods is reimposed on the world, where the entire world will be slave to this private central bank model, and it's great for the bankers and for their pet politicians, but as we can see here in the United States of America, private central banking is a recipe for disaster.
Thanks for watching Part 1. Don't miss Part 2, and be sure to visit sgtreport.com for all of my original content and the most important daily news. And check out thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. Thanks for watching.